Hi, this is Betty Fikes Pillsbury, and I've had a request from BJ to explain some of the stitches and some of the threads I use when working on driftwood. The first thing I'd like to say is that I was inspired by Sally from We Folk Studio, who does amazing work. You can go to her website and she has tutorials. Now with the driftwood, she had said to build up layers of felt onto the driftwood by gluing it down and then working your stitches through. I had a little bit of difficulty with that because of arthritis and other hand things. So what I do is work on felt first, very tiny, teeny pieces of felt, do my stitches on it, and then glue it into place. For instance, for this piece here, I basically figured out the shape that I would need for the felt, cut that out, and then added all sorts of French knots and various threads and colors to fill in that space. Here I took velvet, decided to fill in that crevice here, and cut out that shape. For this, I've used drizzle stitches for the hanging bits, chenille thread to make French knots. Here's some cut turkey work. This floppy stuff is a piece of gimp braid that I had that was all loopy with these threads already hanging down. And you can see I applied it under here as well. Here's a resin skull that I used some paints on to give it a little bit of age and dimension. And again, here's a whole bunch of French knots. And I'm going to put my finger in here just for scale so you can see just how small some of these French knots are. For the mushrooms here, that's a detached blanket stitch. Here's some French knots, and then I used flower stamens that you would use for wired ribbon work or perhaps even dried flowers. These are the little lichens sticking up. Here I've used bullion knots, more French knots in various colors. I've put a stack of stones here. I glued those together. And here again, you can see how some of the work is very tiny with bullion knots, French knots. Here again on this carpet. And it depends on what kind of thread that you're using and how loosely or tightly you wrap the threads. And here you can see more drizzle stitches. More chenille French knots, and then with some rayon thread on top. For the mushrooms, I worked the stems in silk floss, and I did some stump work. So there's wire on here. I stitched the circle, cut them out, and then attached them to some florist wire and put it in the groove that was naturally in this piece of driftwood, and then added French knots to fill up that seam, cut turkey work. And here are some of the threads. So I used different pearl cottons in different weights. Silk chenille. This thread is called Dazzle. Here's a silk trebizond that's really great for making French knots. Here's a bundle of fibers that someone gave me. So it's various materials, rayon, silk, cotton, wool, good old cotton floss, and some silk floss. So using your imagination and a little bit of creativity, you can turn driftwood into fantasy landscapes. Enjoy.